The photograph is perfect. General Douglas MacArthur strides through the surf, jaws set, eyes fixed on the beach ahead, water splashing around his knees. Behind him, other officers wade ashore. The image will become one of the most famous of World War II, a symbol of American determination, of promises kept, of liberation. But in the moment itself, on October 20th, 1944, MacArthur is furious. The landing craft's ramp dropped too soon. The coxswain misjudged the depth. Now MacArthur's carefully pressed khakis are soaked, his boots full of seawater, and he's wading through knee-deep water like a common soldier instead of making the dignified entrance he'd envisioned for 2.5 years. But he keeps walking, because this moment, however imperfect, is the fulfillment of the most famous promise of the Pacific War. March 11th, 1942, Corregidor Island. March 11th, 1942, Corregidor Island, Philippines. MacArthur stands on the dock in darkness, preparing to board PT-41, one of 4 patrol torpedo boats that will attempt to run the Japanese blockade. Behind him, on the Bataan Peninsula, 78,000 American and Filipino troops are trapped, starving, fighting a hopeless defense. MacArthur has just received a direct order from President Roosevelt to evacuate to Australia. He's argued against it for weeks. Leaving feels like abandonment, like failure, like the end of his career. He's 62 years old. He's 62 years old. He'd been recalled to active duty in July 1941 to command U.S. Army forces in the Far East. 5 months later, the Japanese attacked. His Air Force was destroyed on the ground 9 hours after Pearl Harbor. His defensive strategy collapsed. He'd retreated to Bataan, then to Corregidor, watching his command disintegrate. Now he's being ordered to run. The escape. The patrol boats depart at 7:15 p.m. The sea is rough. He is MacArthur, his wife Jean, their 4-year-old son Arthur, and 17 staff officers crowd into vessels designed for rapid attack, not passenger transport. For 35 hours they're battered by waves, hunted by Japanese patrols, racing south through enemy-controlled waters. MacArthur's wife holds their son, both of them seasick, while the general sits rigid, saying nothing. They reach Mindanao. On March 13th. From there, B-17 bombers will fly them to Australia. But the planes that arrive are battered wrecks held together with spare parts and hope. One has no brakes. Another's hydraulics are failing. MacArthur looks at these aircraft that are supposed to carry him across 1,000 miles of ocean and says nothing. They board anyway. March 17th, Darwin. They land at Darwin on March 17th. MacArthur expects to find substantial forces waiting, the army he'll use to return and relieve the Philippines. Instead, he finds chaos. Darwin was bombed 2 weeks ago. There are no significant combat forces. Australia itself is nearly defenseless. Terrified of Japanese invasion, MacArthur has escaped one disaster only to land in another. The train to Melbourne. A train carries him south toward Melbourne. At a brief stop at Terowie, a tiny railway junction in South Australia, reporters crowd around. They want a statement. MacArthur, exhausted, humiliated, still processing the magnitude of what he's left behind, speaks briefly. I came through and I shall return. The words catch. The words are almost offhand, but something in them catches. MacArthur himself recognizes it. Over the following days, as he settles into his new headquarters in Melbourne, he refines the phrase, drops the first part, makes it simpler, more direct. I shall return. His staff suggests we. His staff suggests we shall return. It's more appropriate, they argue. It's not about him personally. It's about American forces, about the Allied effort. MacArthur refuses. We is vague, he says. Weak is political. I is a promise. I means someone specific is coming back, someone the Filipino people know, someone who won't forget them. The phrase becomes official policy. The phrase becomes official policy. The U.S. government prints it on leaflets, drops millions over the occupied Philippines, Filipino guerrillas painted on walls. It appears in graffiti across Manila, in villages, on roads. The Japanese try to suppress it, painting over it, arresting anyone caught writing it, but it spreads anyway. I shall return becomes more than propaganda. It becomes faith. For MacArthur, it becomes obsession. Melbourne, June 1942. Melbourne, June 1942. MacArthur takes command of Southwest Pacific area, one of two Pacific commands. Admiral Chester Nimitz controls the Central Pacific. MacArthur controls the Southwest, which includes Australia, New Guinea, and eventually, he believes, the route back to the Philippines. He immediately begins planning the return. Not whether, but when. But the strategic situation is grim. But the strategic situation is grim. The Japanese control everything from Burma to the Solomon Islands. They're building an airfield on Guadalcanal. They're advancing through New Guinea. The Americans are still reeling from 6 months of defeats. There are no resources for a Philippines campaign. MacArthur's promised return seems impossibly distant. He begins the slow advance. Anyway, he begins the slow advance anyway. Guadalcanal in August 1942, Papua New Guinea in September. Each battle is brutal, each advance measured in miles. The Japanese fight for every island, every ridge, every airfield. American forces learn jungle warfare the hard way, through malaria, ambush, heat, exhaustion. MacArthur's communiques are confident, describing victories and advances. The reality is messier, desperate fights. High casualties progress, measured in weeks and months, but he's moving toward the Philippines, slowly, painfully, but moving. Meanwhile, on Luzon, the men MacArthur left behind fight and die. April 9th, 1942. The Bataan garrison surrenders. 78,000 prisoners begin the Bataan death march. 65 miles of brutality. Thousands die on the march itself. Thousands more in the camps. May 6th. Corregidor holds out until May 6th, then surrenders. 11,000 more prisoners. The entire Philippines falls under Japanese occupation. The reports MacArthur receives reports, fragmentary at first, then more detailed. The death march, the prison camps, the executions, the treatment of Filipino civilians. Each report deepens his determination. The promise to return becomes personal obligation. These men trusted him, he left them, he will come back. By 1943, a strategic debate. But by 1943, a strategic debate is developing in Washington that threatens to make his promise impossible to keep. The question is simple. What's the fastest way to defeat Japan? Admiral Ernest King's position. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, argues for a Central Pacific drive. Island hop straight across. Gilbert's, Marshall's, Marianas. Then either Formosa or directly to Japan bypass the Philippines entirely. They're not strategically necessary. Taking them would cost months and thousands of lives for no military gain. MacArthur's position. MacArthur argues the opposite. The Philippines are essential, both strategically and morally. Strategically, They cut Japanese supply lines to the South Pacific. Morally, America has a responsibility. The Filipinos are American nationals. They've suffered 3 years of occupation. They've maintained resistance, believing in the promise of return. Bypassing them would be betrayal. The debate becomes heated. King sees MacArthur's position as personal ego, a general putting his reputation above sound strategy. MacArthur sees King's position as moral cowardice, abandoning allies for convenience. Both men appeal to Roosevelt. Roosevelt's position. Roosevelt, facing a 1944 election, understands the political dimension. "I shall return" has become famous. MacArthur is a national hero. Abandoning the Philippines would be politically disastrous. But Roosevelt also understands the strategic arguments. He needs both commanders to win the war. He can't fully side with either. The compromise. Both approaches continue. Nimitz advances through the Central Pacific. MacArthur advances through the Southwest Pacific. They'll see which route proves more effective. The Philippines question remains open. For MacArthur, this is unacceptable. He intensifies his advance. New Guinea through 1943 and early 1944, Hollandia in April 1944, Biak in May. Each operation brings him closer to the Philippines. Each operation is also an argument. See how quickly we're advancing. See how well the island-hopping strategy works here. Let us continue to the Philippines. July 1944. By July 1944, MacArthur's forces are in Morotai, just 300 miles from Mindanao, the southernmost major Philippine island. The question can't be delayed any longer. Roosevelt calls a conference in Hawaii, July 26, 1944. The Hawaii Conference, July 26, 1944. MacArthur and Nimitz will both attend. Roosevelt will decide. MacArthur arrives in his leather flight jacket, carefully staged in formality. He knows this meeting determines everything. If Roosevelt decides to bypass the Philippines, the promise dies, his reputation dies. Thousands of Filipinos who've risked their lives believing in his word will be abandoned. MacArthur makes his case. He makes his case for 6 hours. The strategic arguments. The Philippines control the sea lanes. They provide air bases. They're the key to isolating Japanese forces in Southeast Asia. The moral arguments. America's responsibility to its nationals. The importance of keeping promises. The propaganda value of liberation. The political arguments, though these are implicit. The election is 3 months away. Abandoning the Philippines would be a gift to Roosevelt's opponents, Nimitz's position. Nimitz argues for Formosa. Closer to Japan, better harbors, avoids the difficult terrain of the Philippines, faster route to victory. Roosevelt listens, asks questions, gives no indication of his decision. The meeting ends. MacArthur returns to his headquarters, uncertain. September. The answer. The answer comes in September. Roosevelt approves the Philippines invasion, Leyte first, then Luzon. MacArthur's promise will be kept. But there's a complication. The original plan called for a November invasion. MacArthur wants October. Every week of delay is another week of Japanese occupation. Another week of suffering for Filipino civilians and prisoners. Admiral William Halsey, commanding 3rd Fleet, reports that Japanese air power in the Philippines appears weaker than expected. His carrier strikes in September met minimal resistance. Maybe the Japanese are weaker than intelligence suggests. Maybe an earlier invasion is possible. MacArthur seizes the suggestion. He pushes for October 20th. The planners say it's too soon. There's not enough time to prepare. MacArthur overrules them. October 20th. The promise has waited long enough. The invasion force. The invasion force is massive. 7th Fleet under Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, 738 vessels. 6th Army under Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, 174,000 troops. 3rd Fleet under Halsey, 17 carriers, 6 battleships covering the northern approaches. It's the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific to date. October 18th, MacArthur boards. The Nashville MacArthur boards the cruiser USS Nashville on October 18th. With him are Philippine President Sergio Osmeña, who's been in exile since 1942, Brigadier General Carlos Romulo, a Philippine Army officer who will broadcast the return to the Filipino people. MacArthur paces the deck as the fleet approaches Leyte. He's planned this moment for 2.5 years, imagined it thousands of times. Now it's hours away. October 20th, 1944, 10 a.m. October 20th, 1944, 10 a.m. The bombardment begins. Battleships and cruisers hammer the beach's aircraft from the carriers strike inland. The noise is overwhelming, a continuous thunder of explosions. At 10:17 a.m., the first wave of landing craft heads for the beach. MacArthur watches from the Nashville. The initial reports are good. Light resistance troops moving inland. By noon, the beachhead is secure. It's time. The landing craft MacArthur transfers to a landing craft, an LCVP designed to carry 36 troops. With him are Osmeña, Romulo, Lieutenant General Richard Sutherland, his chief of staff, several other officers. The plan is simple. The landing craft will run up on to the beach. The ramp will drop. MacArthur will stride ashore, dry and dignified, and make his broadcast. The approach. The landing craft approaches Red Beach at Palo. The coxswain is nervous. He's landing a general, the supreme commander, the man who promised to return. He needs to get as close to the beach as possible. But there are sandbars. The water depth is unpredictable. He makes his approach, judges his moment, and drops the ramp. Too soon, too soon. They're 50 feet from the beach. The water is knee-deep, maybe deeper. MacArthur, standing at the front, sees the water and understands immediately. This isn't the dignified arrival he planned, but there's no choice. Hundreds of troops are watching. Thousands more are fighting inland. He can't sit in the landing craft and wait for another approach. He steps off the ramp. He steps off the ramp into the water. It's warm, bathwater warm, and deeper than it looked. It soaks his khakis immediately, fills his boots. He starts waiting, keeping his eyes fixed on the beach, refusing to look down at the water, maintaining his bearing. Behind him, the other officers follow. Osmeña, in his 60s, struggles slightly. Sutherland keeps pace. Romulo, shorter, finds the water nearly waist deep. On the beach, Army Signal Corps photographers are ready. They've been positioned to capture the moment. But this isn't what they expected either. They start shooting anyway. Carl Meidens from Life magazine is there too, camera ready. He recognizes instantly that this unplanned moment is better than any staged arrival could have been. He shoots frame after frame as MacArthur wades ashore, jaw-set water splashing. The other officers behind him, MacArthur reaches the beach. MacArthur reaches the beach at 1 p.m. His uniform is soaked. His boots squelch. He's annoyed at the coxswain, annoyed at the water. annoyed that this moment he's imagined so carefully has been compromised by a misjudgment of depth. But he's here, on Philippine soil. After 2.5 years, the broadcast, a mobile radio transmitter, has been set up just off the beach. MacArthur walks to it, still dripping. The technicians hand him the microphone. He's supposed to wait. Let them test the connection, make sure everything's working. He doesn't wait. He keys the microphone and begins speaking. People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil, soil consecrated in the blood of our two peoples. His voice is steady, formal, the same voice that's been issuing communiques for 3 years. But there's something else in it now. Satisfaction, vindication, the promise kept. He continues for several minutes. The broadcast goes out across the Philippines, across the Pacific. In Manila, Filipinos crowd around hidden radios, listening, crying in prison camps. American and Filipino prisoners hear the news third hand. Passed from cell to cell, MacArthur has returned. The promise was real, but the broadcast isn't just for them. It's also for MacArthur himself. For 2.5 years, I shall return has defined him. It's been his purpose, his obsession, his redemption for the humiliation of 1942. Now he's fulfilled it. He's waded ashore. He's here. The photographers want more. The photographers want more shots. The initial photos are good, but they want better angles, clearer images. MacArthur, still annoyed about the water, but understanding the importance of the moment, agrees to wade back into the surf and repeat the scene. He does it twice more. The photographers get their shots. The images will appear in newspapers worldwide. The unplanned wading through water becomes the defining image of the return. The implications over the following days, the implications of that return become clear. The Japanese, who had believed the Americans would bypass the Philippines, are caught off balance. But they respond with everything they have. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23rd to 26th, becomes the largest naval battle in history. 4 separate engagements across hundreds of miles. The Japanese lose 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, 11 destroyers. It's a decisive American victory, but it's also brutal. The kamikaze attacks begin here. Desperate Japanese pilots crashing their aircraft into American ships. On Leyte itself, the ground campaign becomes a nightmare. The Japanese pour in reinforcements. The terrain is mountainous, jungled, soaked with rain. The battle that was supposed to last weeks extends into December. American casualties. 3,500 killed, 12,000 wounded. Japanese casualties, 49,000 killed, only 389 captured. They fight with the desperation of men who know they're losing not just a battle, but the war. MacArthur moves his headquarters. To Leyte on October 23rd. He tours the island, visits the troops, inspects the fighting. But he also begins planning the next phase, Luzon. Leyte versus Luzon. The return to Leyte is symbolically important, but Luzon is the real prize. Manila is on Luzon. The main prison camps are on Luzon. The bulk of the Filipino population is on Luzon. The liberation isn't complete until Luzon is free. January 9th, 1945. The Luzon invasion. The Luzon invasion begins January 9th, 1945. It's even larger than Leyte, 280,000 troops in the initial assault. MacArthur comes ashore at Lingayen Gulf, the same beach where the Japanese invaded in December 1941. This time, he doesn't have to wade. The landing craft gets him all the way to the beach. But the symbolism is the same, the circle closing. The defeat of 1941 being reversed. The advance on Manila. The advance on Manila takes a month. The Japanese don't defend the city in the conventional sense. They retreat into it, fortify it, force the Americans to fight block by block. The battle for Manila. The battle for Manila, February 3rd to March 3rd, 1945, destroys the city. 16,000 Japanese troops die, 1,000 Americans, 100,000 Filipino civilians caught in the crossfire, killed in massacres, starved in the siege. February 27th, MacArthur enters Manila. MacArthur enters Manila on February 27th. The city he knew, the Pearl of the Orient, is rubble. Entire neighborhoods are burned. Bodies lie in the streets. The destruction is worse than anything he saw in the Pacific War, but the city is liberated. The prison camps are liberated. 37,000 prisoners, including those who survived Bataan and Corregidor, are freed. The ceremony. On February 27th, MacArthur attends a ceremony at Malacañang Palace, the seat of Philippine government. President Osmeña is there. Filipino officials who survived the occupation, American officers. MacArthur speaks briefly. "I have returned," he says again. "The hour of your redemption is here. But the cost of redemption is visible everywhere. The Philippines campaign, Leyte through Luzon, kills 14,000 Americans, wounds 48,000 more Japanese deaths, exceed 200,000 Filipino civilian deaths, estimated at over 500,000. Though the true number may never be known, Manila is the second most destroyed Allied city of World War II after Warsaw. Was it worth it? Was it worth it? The strategic debate that MacArthur won in July 1944 continues among historians. King's alternative, bypassing the Philippines for Formosa, might have ended the war sooner, might have cost fewer lives, or it might not have. What the Philippines campaign accomplished destroyed Japanese naval power at Leyte Gulf, cut Japan's supply lines to Southeast Asia, provided air bases for the bombing campaign against Japan itself, and it kept a promise. For MacArthur, the question isn't debatable. The promise had to be kept, not just for strategic reasons, not just for political reasons, but because he said he would return, because 78,000 men trusted him in 1942, and he left them, because millions of Filipinos believed his promise and resisted for 3 years, because his word, his honor, his entire sense of himself required it. The photograph of him wading ashore, the one taken in that unplanned moment when the landing craft stopped too soon, becomes one of the defining images of the Pacific War. It appears in newspapers, magazines, history books. It's reproduced on posters, stamps, monuments. MacArthur himself keeps a copy in his office for the rest of his life. But the moment itself, the actual experience of wading through that warm water with his uniform soaking and his carefully planned entrance ruined, is more complicated than the photograph suggests. It's triumph and humiliation mixed together. The promise kept and the cost of keeping it, personal vindication and the weight of all those who died waiting for it. MacArthur stands on Red Beach. MacArthur stands on Red Beach, water dripping from his uniform, microphone in hand, and says, "I have returned. 3 words, a promise fulfilled, but also a beginning. The return is just the start. The liberation will take 8 more months. The fighting will continue until Japan surrenders in August 1945. And even then, the Philippines will bear the scars of occupation and liberation for decades. But in that moment, on October the 20th, 1944, with the water still dripping from his boots and the cameras capturing the scene, MacArthur has done what he promised. He has returned. The words he spoke at Terowie almost offhandedly in March 1942 have become reality. The promise that became propaganda, that became faith, that became obsession, is fulfilled. 2 versions, both true. The photograph shows a general striding through surf, determined, unstoppable. The reality is messier. A man annoyed at a coxswain's mistake, aware that his entrance is ruined, but walking forward anyway because there's no other choice, because he promised, because thousands of people believed him, because his entire sense of himself required it. Both versions are true. The heroic image and the complicated reality. The promise kept and the cost of keeping it. The words "I shall return" and everything they meant to everyone who heard them. The Pacific War changes. MacArthur wades ashore and the Pacific War changes. Not because of the wading itself, not because of the photograph, but because a promise made in defeat has been fulfilled in victory. Because sometimes in war, the symbolic matters as much as the strategic. Because "I shall return" wasn't just propaganda, it was a commitment. And on October 20th, 1944, standing on Philippine soil with his uniform soaked and his boots full of water, Douglas MacArthur makes good on it. The cameras capture the moment. The cameras capture the moment. The radio broadcast carries the words across the Pacific. And in Manila, in prison camps, in villages across the Philippines, people hear the news and know he came back, just like he said he would. Conclusion: if this story of promises kept against impossible odds, of a man who refused to forget the people he left behind, has moved you, subscribe to On That Day right now. Hit that like button and share this with anyone who wants to understand what MacArthur said when he returned to the Philippines. Drop a comment. Was MacArthur's insistence on returning to the Philippines the right decision? And where in the world are you watching from? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.